My name is Amanda, and this story revolves around my older sister, Sarah, her fiancé, James, and a whirlwind of drama that escalated into chaos. To start, Sarah and I were never close. She was always the golden child, straight A's, popular, and the apple of our parents' eyes. Me? I was the black sheep, the screw-up who never lived up to their expectations. That dynamic always made family gatherings tense, but Thanksgiving last year brought things to a boiling point. The night started predictably awkward. Our mom, an eternal perfectionist, bustled around the kitchen while Sarah basked in the compliments she received for her engagement ring, career accomplishments, and her latest social media-worthy vacation. I hovered on the sidelines, trying not to draw attention to myself. When dinner was served, I slid into a seat at the far end of the table, hoping to blend into the background. Then James, Sarah's fiancé, did something no one in my family ever did. He noticed me. He pulled out my chair as I approached the table, earning a subtle eye roll from Sarah. "Amanda, right?" he asked, a warm smile on his face. I nodded, taken aback by the genuine interest in his tone. Throughout the meal, he continued to engage with me. He asked about my work, freelancing as a graphic designer, and didn't laugh dismissively like Sarah had in the past. Instead, he seemed genuinely impressed. "That's so cool," he said after I explained a recent project. It must feel amazing to bring someone's vision to life. The rest of the table, including Sarah, stayed mostly silent. When James laughed at one of my clumsy jokes about the overcooked turkey, I noticed Sarah's forced smile twitch. The tension became palpable. Every time James spoke to me, Sarah's eyes darted between us, narrowing slightly. By the end of the night, her responses to him were curt, almost cutting. The night ended without any major incidents, but the unease lingered long after I left. I replayed the interactions in my head, wondering if I had crossed some invisible line. To me, James had simply been kind, a rare experience in my family. But Sarah's glares told a different story. A week later, Sarah called me out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. We rarely talked unless it was about family logistics or some favor she needed. Her voice was clipped as she skipped past pleasantries. "What the hell did you say to James at Thanksgiving?" she demanded. I froze, the question catching me off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Amanda," she snapped. "He's been distracted ever since. He keeps bringing you up in conversation. What did you do?" Her accusation hit like a slap. I stammered, trying to explain that I hadn't done anything. "He was just being polite, Sarah." "Maybe you're reading too much into it." "Polite?" she scoffed. "He's never polite like that. Not to anyone. Especially not to you." Her words stung, but I try to keep my voice calm. "Maybe it's just because I'm not around much, and he was trying to make me feel included. That's all." But Sarah wasn't having it. "No," she said coldly. "It's something else. I can feel it." I didn't know what to say. The conversation ended with her accusing me of undermining her relationship, followed by a pointed warning to stay away from James. For days after that call, I felt uneasy. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that Sarah's insecurities weren't my problem. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Every interaction I had with James during Thanksgiving replayed in my mind. Had I laughed too hard at his jokes? Had I shared too much when he asked about my job? The next time I saw Sarah was at another family gathering. She barely acknowledged me, clinging tightly to James's arm as if staking her claim. James, for his part, gave me a polite smile and a friendly nod, but he seemed more subdued than usual. It was clear that Sarah had told him something. What she'd said, I had no idea, but the tension was undeniable. I tried to keep my distance, speaking only when spoken to and avoiding eye contact. But even that didn't stop Sarah from glaring at me the entire evening. I left early that night, my stomach churning with anxiety. I had no way of knowing it at the time, but that Thanksgiving dinner was the spark that would ignite a wildfire, one that would consume everything in its path. Months passed after that Thanksgiving dinner, and I didn't hear a word from Sarah. To be honest, I wasn't surprised. Our relationship had always been lukewarm at best, so her radio silence felt more like a reprieve than a punishment. I focused on work, caught up with friends, and tried to move past the bizarre tension that had flared up between us. That illusion of peace shattered at a family barbecue in late spring. I was sitting by the grill, sipping on a soda and pretending to be interested in my uncle's story about his new fishing gear, when a cousin wandered over and casually dropped a bomb. "Are you excited for Sarah's wedding?" she asked, nibbling on a plate of potato salad. My stomach twisted. "Wedding?" "Yeah, in a couple of months." It's supposed to be huge. Destination venue, open bar, the works. Didn't she tell you? I forced a smile, pretending to brush off the surprise. Must have slipped her mind, I said, though my chest felt tight. For the rest of the barbecue, I couldn't focus. I overheard snippets of conversations about dress fittings, venue decor, and bridal showers. Details everyone seemed to know except me. I kept waiting for someone to mention an invitation, but no one did. By the end of the night, I realized the truth. Sarah hadn't told me, because I wasn't invited. I spent the next week convincing myself there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe Sarah had planned to send an invitation but forgot. Maybe it got lost in the mail. But just as I was about to reach out and ask, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. I answered, feeling both hopeful and apprehensive. Hey, Sarah. Her tone was cold, almost clinical. I'm calling to let you know you're not invited to the wedding. The bluntness of it knocked the air out of my lungs. What? It's better this way, she continued. James has feelings for you. Your presence would be uncomfortable for everyone, especially him. I blinked, stunned into silence. Sarah, that's insane. James doesn't have feelings for me. He's your fiancé. She scoffed. Don't act innocent, Amanda. You've been trying to ruin my life since we were kids. First, you embarrassed me at Thanksgiving, and now you want to take James from me. It's pathetic. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I struggled to respond, my voice shaking. I haven't done anything to you, Sarah. James was just being nice. This is all in your head. But she didn't let me finish. I'm not going to let you ruin the happiest day of my life, she said. Stay away from my wedding, Amanda. I mean it. Before I could argue further, she hung up. For hours, I sat on my couch, replaying the conversation in my head. Her accusations were absurd, yet the way she'd spoken made it clear she genuinely believed them. My mind flashed back to Thanksgiving, to every awkward glance and tense moment. Had James done something I didn't notice? Had I unknowingly given him the wrong impression? The news spread like wildfire among our extended family. Some relatives called to express their outrage at Sarah's behavior, while others defended her, saying she was just stressed and trying to protect her relationship. The whole situation was humiliating. I received a particularly nasty call from our mother. You need to apologize to your sister, she said, her voice stern. For what? I asked, incredulous. I didn't do anything. Maybe not intentionally, she admitted, but you've clearly made her feel threatened. Can't you just be the bigger person and step back for once? The conversation left me feeling like I was a teenager again, being scolded for things I hadn't done. No matter what I said, it seemed like Sarah's version of events was the only one that mattered. A few days later, I got another call, this time from James. I hesitated before answering, unsure if I even wanted to hear what he had to say. Hey, Amanda, he began, his voice awkward and uncertain. I heard about the situation. Yeah, I said flatly. Sarah made it pretty clear I'm not welcome. He sighed heavily. Look, I don't know what Sarah's told you, but this isn't about me having feelings for you. That's not true. Then why does she think it is? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. She's been acting different lately. Paranoid. Jealous. I've tried to talk to her about it, but it just makes things worse. His words should have been reassuring, but they only made me feel worse. If even James couldn't reason with her, what chance did I have? I'm sorry this is happening, he added after a long pause. You don't deserve this. Thanks, I muttered, unsure what else to say. After we hung up, I sat in silence, my thoughts swirling. James's call had confirmed what I already suspected. Sarah's insecurities had spiraled out of control, and I was the easiest target. But knowing that didn't make the situation any easier to bear. The wedding was still months away, and already it felt like a storm was brewing, a storm that I couldn't outrun. The day of Sarah's rehearsal dinner, I was camped out on my couch, half watching a Netflix documentary and trying to forget about the whole ordeal. The wedding was less than 48 hours away, and despite my ban, the air felt heavy with anticipation. I knew my absence would raise questions among the extended family, but I figured Sarah had already spun some story to cover her tracks. Then my phone buzzed. It was my cousin Melissa, the unofficial family gossip. She never called unless there was something juicy to share, so I hesitated before picking up. Hey, I answered cautiously. Oh my God, Amanda, she blurted out, her voice breathless with excitement. You are not going to believe what's happening right now. What? I asked, my heart sinking. It's chaos at the rehearsal dinner. James just called Sarah out for banning you from the wedding, like in front of everyone. My pulse quickened. What do you mean called her out? What happened? Melissa launched into a rapid-fire account of the drama. Apparently, during the dinner, James had casually asked Sarah why I wasn't attending. Sarah, clearly caught off guard, tried to brush it off, muttering something about me being busy. But James wasn't satisfied. He kept pressing, Melissa said, barely pausing for breath. He was like, "It doesn't make sense. Amanda would have told me if she had a conflict." And Sarah started getting defensive. She tried to change the subject, but James wouldn't let it go. According to Melissa, the tension in the room was palpable. Guests were whispering, forks clinking awkwardly against plates as Sarah grew increasingly flustered. Finally, she snapped. Melissa continued. She said, "Fine. I didn't invite her because she makes you uncomfortable." I froze. She actually said that. Word for word, Melissa confirmed. And James just lost it. He stood up and started yelling, saying it was ridiculous and cruel to exclude you. He called her insecure and toxic. Oh, Amanda, it was brutal. I could barely process what I was hearing. What happened next? Sarah started sobbing, of course, Melissa said. But James wasn't having it. He told everyone he couldn't marry someone who treats her own sister like garbage. Then he walked out. Just stormed out of the restaurant. For a moment, I sat in stunned silence, trying to make sense of it all. Melissa's voice pulled me back. So, are you okay? She asked awkwardly. I don't even know how to feel, I admitted. Well, whatever happens, everyone's talking about it, Melissa added. And for what it's worth, I think James was right to call her out. Sarah's been awful to you for years. I thanked her for letting me know, though her words felt hollow. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, half expecting Sarah to call and unleash her wrath. Instead, hours passed in tense silence. Finally, just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. I debated whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hellos." Her voice was shaky, thick with tears. "Amanda, I need you to fix this." "What?" I said, taken aback. "James is refusing to talk to me," she sobbed. "He's saying he won't go through with the wedding unless you're there." I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. "So now you want me at the wedding? After banning me and humiliating me for months?" "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she wailed. "I was just, I don't know, scared. But you have to help me. Just come to the wedding and tell James you chose not to come to the rehearsal dinner. He'll believe you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to lie? To cover for you? Please, Amanda," she begged. "If you don't, I'll lose everything." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Hearing her sob like that reminded me of the rare times as kids when she'd let her guard down, when she wasn't the golden child or the queen bee, but just my sister. But then I thought about the months of accusations, the humiliating phone calls, and the way she'd turned our family against me. I thought about how she'd tried to paint me as some conniving villain to justify her own insecurities. "No, Sarah," I said firmly. "You're facing the consequences of your actions. I'm not going to lie for you." She cried harder, sputtering out desperate pleas, but I stood my ground. Eventually, she hung up, her sobs echoing in my ear long after the line went dead. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, replaying the conversation in my head. Part of me wondered if I should have just gone along with it, if only to keep the peace. But deep down, I knew I'd made the right choice. For the first time, I wasn't bending over backward to appease Sarah or anyone else in my family. The next morning, I learned through the grapevine that James hadn't shown up for the wedding. The ceremony was officially called off, and Sarah was blaming me for ruining her life. I knew the storm was far from over. But as I sat there, sipping my morning coffee, I felt a small flicker of pride. For once, I had chosen to stand up for myself. And I wasn't going to apologize for it. The wedding was officially called off the next morning. James didn't show up at the venue, leaving Sarah and a room full of guests to grapple with the glaring absence of a groom. As expected, Sarah blamed me entirely. I found out through a cousin that she had stormed out of the venue, wailing about how I had manipulated James into leaving her. It didn't take long for the accusations to reach my parents. By noon, my phone was lighting up with messages from my mom, dad, and even a few aunts and uncles. The texts ranged from guilt-tripping, "How could you do this to your sister?" to outright threats, "If you don't fix this, you're out of the family." I ignored them, but the flood of calls that followed made it impossible to relax. The final straw came when my mom showed up at my door, her face a mix of anger and desperation. "Amanda, open up," she demanded, pounding on the door. I didn't budge. "Go home, Mom. I'm not leaving until you talk to me," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "Sarah is devastated. You need to fix this mess." I opened the door just enough to glare at her through the gap. "Fix what, exactly?" Sarah banned me from her wedding and blamed me for her insecurities. "This isn't my mess to fix." "She's your sister," my mom snapped. "Family forgives. Family also respects boundaries," I shot back, my voice rising. And Sarah crossed every line. "I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do." Before she could argue further, I closed the door in her face. I felt a pang of guilt as I heard her sigh heavily and walk away, but I refused to let myself waver. A few days later, James reached out. His text was simple but unexpected. "Can we talk? I owe you an apology." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to stay out of the mess entirely, but curiosity won out. When we spoke, his voice was calm but tinged with regret. "I'm sorry for how things turned out," he began. "You didn't deserve to be dragged into all of this." "It's not your fault," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. "It kind of is," he admitted. "Sarah's been difficult for a while. She's always been jealous and controlling, but the way she treated you, banning you from the wedding, accusing you of things you didn't do, that was the final straw. I couldn't marry someone like that." His words validated so much of what I'd been feeling for years, and I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. "Thank you for saying that," I said softly. "But I think it's best if we don't stay in touch. This whole situation is toxic, and I need to move on." James agreed, though I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry," he said before hanging up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. James's apology was a small comfort, but it didn't erase the damage Sarah had done, or the storm that was still brewing. Unfortunately, Sarah wasn't ready to let things go. The hateful texts started pouring in almost immediately. "You ruined my life. I hope you're happy. You jealous bee asterisk asterisk. You'll die alone, just like you deserve." At first, I tried to ignore them, telling myself that her anger would burn out eventually. But the messages kept coming, each one nastier than the last. Then one morning, Sarah showed up at my workplace. I was in the parking lot, juggling my coffee and laptop bag, when I heard her voice. "There you are," she screeched, storming toward me. My heart dropped. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" she spat. "I'm here because you destroyed my life. You're a homewrecker, Amanda. A pathetic little homewrecker." Her shouting drew the attention of my coworkers, who stopped to gawk as the scene unfolded. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. "You need to leave, Sarah," I said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere until you admit what you did," she screamed. Security was called before the situation could escalate further. 2 guards escorted her off the property, but not before she hurled a string of insults that echoed in my ears long after she was gone. That night, I sat on my couch, staring blankly at the TV, too drained to even cry. It was clear that Sarah wasn't going to stop, and for the first time, I started to feel genuinely afraid of what she might do next. I knew I had to take action. Ignoring her wasn't working, and my family wasn't going to intervene. It was up to me to protect myself, even if that meant making a decision I wasn't ready for. For a while, I thought Sarah's parking lot outburst was the worst of it. She had been escorted away, humiliated in front of my coworkers, and surely, I hoped, she would calm down after that. But I underestimated the depths of her anger and her ability to escalate. One night, I came home from a late grocery run to find my car vandalized. Deep, jagged scratches ran along both sides, and the word "slut" had been carved into the hood. My mailbox, once bolted securely to its post, lay smashed on the ground. My stomach twisted into knots as I stood there, my heart pounding in the eerie silence of the cul-de-sac. I knew it was Sarah. Who else could it be? But without proof, I had nothing to go on. My neighbors weren't home, and the security cameras at the complex's entrance were notoriously unreliable. I reported the incident to the property manager and filed a claim with my insurance, but it felt like shouting into the void. Then the messages started. At first, they came from Sarah's number. More angry texts calling me a homewrecker, a jealous loser, a disease that ruined her life. I blocked her, but that didn't stop the harassment. Anonymous numbers began texting and calling, each one more threatening than the last. "You'll pay for what you did. Everyone knows what kind of person you are. You think you're safe? Just wait." I try to stay calm, but the fear was eating me alive. I started double-checking my locks at night, looking over my shoulder when I walked to my car. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was just past 2 a.m. when I woke to the sound of furious banging on my apartment door. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up in bed, my mind racing. "Amanda, open up." Sarah's voice was shrill and unhinged. "I know you're in there, you coward." My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call the police or confront her. The banging grew louder, more frantic. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "Come out here and face me." I stayed frozen, my back pressed against the wall. My phone's screen glared up at me, the 911 keypad waiting for me to press the call button. "Come on," she shrieked, slamming her fists against the door. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me." I finally dialed, whispering to the operator as Sarah's shouting continued. By the time the police arrived, she was gone. The officers took my statement, but without her there wasn't much they could do beyond suggesting I file a formal report. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the hole in the drywall where her pounding had cracked the plaster. I felt helpless, but also furious. For months, Sarah had terrorized me, and my family had enabled her behavior by refusing to hold her accountable. The next morning, I called my lawyer and started the process of filing a restraining order. I also documented everything: the texts, the photos of my car and mailbox, the police report from the night before. I even reached out to a neighbor who'd heard the commotion and agreed to provide a witness statement. When my family found out, their response was predictably infuriating. "You can't do this," my mom pleaded over the phone. "It'll ruin Sarah's life." "She's ruining my life," I snapped. She keyed my car, smashed my mailbox, and tried to break into my apartment. "What do you expect me to do? Just let her keep going?" "She's your sister," Mom said, as if that excused everything. "Exactly," I replied coldly. "And a sister shouldn't treat me like this." My dad chimed in next, his voice gruff and dismissive. "You're overreacting, Amanda. She's just upset. She's not going to hurt you." "Are you kidding me?" I shouted. "She already has." But they didn't listen. To them, Sarah's actions were forgivable outbursts of a heartbroken woman. To me, they were the calculated choices of someone who felt entitled to destroy my life. By the end of the week, the restraining order was filed. Sarah was served the paperwork at her job, a detail that felt both satisfying and deeply sad. I imagined her humiliation, the disbelief on her face, as she realized I was serious. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. For too long, I'd let my family's guilt-tripping and Sarah's manipulative tactics control my life. Filing that restraining order was the first step toward reclaiming my power. Still, as I sat in my now quiet apartment, the relief was bittersweet. The bond between sisters, fragile as it had always been, was now irrevocably broken. And while I knew I was doing the right thing, I couldn't shake the nagging question: how did it come to this? The restraining order brought a small sense of security to my life, but it didn't mean Sarah was done with me. She was legally required to stay away, yes, but she found other ways to make her presence felt. Through mutual acquaintances and family members, I began hearing stories about the lies she was spreading. Sarah painted me as a manipulative, attention-seeking villain who had orchestrated James's decision to leave her. She claimed I had always been jealous of her and that my ultimate goal was to ruin her life. I knew Amanda couldn't stand that I was getting married, she reportedly told one relative. "She's been bitter and single for so long. It must have killed her to see me happy." The absurdity of it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so effective. Many family members, especially my parents, bought into her narrative completely. When I decided to press charges for the vandalism and harassment, they were horrified, not by Sarah's actions, but by my choice to escalate things. "You're taking this too far, Amanda," my mom scolded over the phone. "This is just going to ruin Sarah's future. Why can't you just let it go?" "Let it go," I repeated, incredulous. She keyed my car, smashed my property, and harassed me for months. "You're seriously asking me to let that slide?" "She's your sister," Mom said, as if that answered anything. "Family forgives." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. But the call left me shaken. It was one thing for Sarah to lash out. It was another for my parents to support her, even after everything she'd done. When the court date finally arrived, my nerves were shot. Walking into the courthouse, I felt like I was carrying the weight of my entire family's disapproval on my shoulders. "Sarah, of course," milked the moment for all it was worth. She showed up with my parents and her lawyer in tow, dressed in a demure black dress and looking like the picture of contrition. The theatrics started almost immediately. During her testimony, Sarah sobbed dramatically, claiming that I had always been jealous of her and had turned James against her out of spite. She wanted to ruin my wedding, she said between sniffles. She hated that I was happy and in love. I sat at the plaintiff's table, stunned by her audacity. The judge, however, didn't seem moved by her crocodile tears. When it was my turn to present evidence, my lawyer laid everything bare. Photos of my keyed car and smashed mailbox, the string of threatening texts, the police report from the night she showed up at my apartment. The most damning piece of evidence was the security footage from my apartment complex, which clearly showed Sarah at my door at 2 a.m., banging and shouting. My neighbor also testified, recounting the night Sarah's screams woke her up and how she'd seen Sarah fleeing when the police arrived. The contrast between Sarah's dramatics and the cold, hard facts was glaring. Her lawyer tried to argue that her actions were the result of emotional distress caused by James's sudden departure, but it wasn't enough. After what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered the verdict. Sarah was found guilty of harassment and ordered to pay restitution for the damages to my car and property. She was also required to attend mandatory counseling as part of her sentence. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As soon as the ruling was announced, Sarah turned to my parents and started sobbing again, loudly proclaiming that she was the real victim and that I was trying to ruin her life. My parents were quick to comfort her, shooting me icy glares as they left the courtroom. Later that day, my mom called. I debated whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "How could you do this to her?" she demanded as soon as I picked up. "Mom, she harassed me. She vandalized my property," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "She's your sister," Mom said, her voice trembling with anger. "Family doesn't do this to each other." "No," I replied, my voice sharp. "Family doesn't terrorize each other. Family doesn't destroy property or send threatening messages. If you want to keep enabling her, that's your choice, but I'm done being her punching bag." The line went quiet for a moment before Mom spoke again, her tone colder than I'd ever heard it. "You're going to regret this, Amanda." I hung up without responding, tears of frustration and exhaustion streaming down my face. Despite the court ruling, I felt no sense of victory. My relationship with my parents was irreparably damaged, and I knew they would never see Sarah for who she truly was. For them, she would always be the golden child, the victim, the one who could do no wrong. I tried to tell myself that I'd done the right thing, that standing up for myself was worth the fallout. But as I sat alone in my apartment that night, I couldn't help but feel the sting of isolation. If family couldn't protect you, who could? After the court case, I felt a deep sense of finality. Sarah's lies, my parents' unrelenting loyalty to her, and the emotional toll of it all had left me drained. I realized that this wasn't just about the events of the past year, it was about a lifetime of being the scapegoat. Sarah had always been the golden child, and I had always been the one expected to endure and forgive. But I couldn't keep playing that role. Cutting ties wasn't a decision I made lightly. For weeks, I wrestled with the guilt of it. What kind of person walks away from their family? Would they hate me forever? But every time I considered reconciling, I remembered my mother's cold dismissal, my father's unwillingness to hold Sarah accountable, and the years of being made to feel like I didn't belong. I packed up my apartment and moved to a new city, far enough away to start fresh. I changed my phone number, deactivated my social media accounts, and told only a few close friends where I was going. The idea of leaving my family behind felt like severing a part of myself, but I knew it was necessary. The first few weeks in my new city were both liberating and lonely. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about Sarah showing up unannounced or my parents calling to guilt-trip me into fixing things. I could walk down the street without feeling like I had to look over my shoulder. But freedom came with a price. There were nights when the silence felt unbearable, when I missed the idea of family, even if I didn't miss the reality of mine. I missed the traditions, the Thanksgiving dinners, the birthdays, even the chaotic family arguments. It was hard to accept that those things were gone, replaced by an unshakable void. I threw myself into building a new life. I focused on my work, joined a local book club, and started volunteering at an animal shelter on weekends. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my sense of self outside of the family dynamic that had defined me for so long. Every so often, I'd hear from James. His messages were always polite and measured. Usually just a quick hope you're doing well or thinking of you. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about staying in touch with him. On one hand, he was the only person who had stood up for me during the chaos with Sarah. On the other hand, any connection to James felt like a potential powder keg waiting to explode. The first time he called after the move, I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "Hey," he replied. "I just wanted to check in. I heard you moved. How's it going?" "It's good," I said cautiously. "Different but good." "I'm glad to hear that," he said. There was a pause, and then he added, "I'm sorry again for everything. You didn't deserve any of this." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "But you don't need to keep apologizing. It's not your fault." "Still," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "If I'd been more honest with Sarah about our issues, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad." I appreciated his sincerity, but I kept my distance. I didn't want to reopen old wounds or give Sarah any reason to think I was interfering in her life again. Our conversations remained friendly but brief, and over time, they became less frequent. Months passed, and the longer I stayed away, the more clarity I gained. Cutting ties wasn't just about escaping Sarah's toxicity, it was about reclaiming my own sense of worth. For years, I had internalized the idea that I was the problem, that I wasn't enough. But now, with the distance and space to reflect, I realized how much of that narrative had been forced upon me. Still, the journey wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt when I wondered if I'd made the right decision. Would my parents ever understand why I left? Would they ever see Sarah for who she really was? One particularly quiet evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my laptop. There was a picture from years ago, me and Sarah as kids, grinning with popsicles in hand. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, a longing for the relationship we might have had if things had been different. But as I closed the laptop, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person I'd been back then. I had grown, set boundaries, and chosen to prioritize my own well-being. And for the first time in years, I felt like that was enough. A year passed, and my new life began to feel normal. The chaos of the previous year felt like a distant storm, one I'd weathered but not entirely escaped. Therapy became my anchor during that time. My therapist was patient, guiding me through the tangled mess of my family dynamics and helping me unpack years of blame, guilt, and resentment. "Closure isn't always about tying things up neatly," she said during one session. "Sometimes, it's about accepting that the past can't be changed and choosing to move forward anyway." I wanted to believe her, but the wounds were still too raw. The memories of Sarah's accusations, my parents' betrayal, and the courtroom drama replayed in my mind like an unwelcome film reel. It was hard to reconcile the love I'd once had for my family with the pain they had caused me. To distract myself, I immersed myself in my new life. Work was going well, and I even started taking on passion projects, a mural for a local library, illustrations for a children's book. I made friends in my book club, built connections at the animal shelter, and found joy in small routines, like Saturday morning coffee at the quirky cafe down the street. But even with all the progress I was making, the ghost of my family lingered. Through the grapevine, I heard bits and pieces about Sarah. A cousin mentioned during a rare phone call that Sarah was dating anyone who'd pay her attention and that her relationships were crashing and burning almost as fast as they started. "She's not doing well," the cousin said, her voice low. "She's alienated a lot of people. Even your parents are struggling to keep up with her mood swings." Part of me felt vindicated. For years, I had been the scapegoat, the one blamed for everything wrong in Sarah's life. But now, without me there to absorb the fallout, Sarah's behavior was starting to catch up to her. Still, I couldn't entirely shake the guilt. What if I had handled things differently? What if I had tried harder to de-escalate the situation? What if I had just shown up to the wedding, swallowed my pride, and let her have her day? Those questions haunted me in the quiet moments, the ones when I couldn't distract myself with work or friends. One day, during therapy, I voiced those doubts aloud. What if I was too harsh? I asked, my voice shaky. What if I made things worse by standing my ground? My therapist regarded me with a kind but firm expression. "Amanda, you've spent most of your life putting your family's needs above your own. What you did, setting boundaries, standing up for yourself, wasn't cruel. It was necessary. The fallout wasn't your fault. It was the result of patterns that existed long before you decided to take a stand." Her words resonated, but they didn't erase the ache entirely. I wanted to believe I had done the right thing, but the guilt clung to me like a second skin. Even now, I felt a faint tug of responsibility for Sarah's unraveling. I couldn't tell if it was the guilt instilled in me by years of familial manipulation or if some small part of me still cared about her, despite everything. For once, though, I wasn't rushing to fix it. I wasn't reaching out to my parents, trying to repair something irreparable. I wasn't offering Sarah an olive branch, hoping she'd finally treat me with the respect I deserved. Instead, I focused on the small victories. I had built a life for myself, one where I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells or living in someone else's shadow. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past still lingered, but it was mine. Some days, that felt like enough. Other days, the weight of the what-ifs threatened to pull me under. But through it all, I kept moving forward, one step at a time. It was an ordinary afternoon when I found the letter waiting for me in the mailbox. The envelope was plain, with no return address, and my first instinct was to toss it aside as junk mail. But the moment I saw Sarah's familiar handwriting scrawled across the front, my heart sank. I carried it inside, staring at it for what felt like an eternity before I finally opened it. The letter was handwritten on lined paper, her sentences uneven and messy. As I read, my emotions swung wildly between anger, confusion, and an ache I couldn't quite name. She started by blaming me, of course. "You've destroyed my life, Amanda. I hope you know that. You made me lose James, ruined my wedding, and turned our family against me. I'll never understand why you've always hated me so much." I almost stopped reading right there, but something compelled me to keep going. The tone of the letter shifted abruptly in the middle, turning from accusatory to remorseful. "I know I've hurt you too. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through my issues. My therapist says I need to make amends, and I want to start with you. I miss my sister. Can we talk? Please?" The last lines caught me off guard. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll give me a chance to make things right. I don't want to lose you forever." I set the letter down, my chest tight. Her words stirred up a mess of emotions I wasn't ready to confront. For weeks, the letter sat on my kitchen counter, untouched. Every time I glanced at it, I felt the pull of conflicting impulses. Part of me wanted to respond, to test the waters and see if Sarah's apology was genuine. Maybe therapy had changed her. Maybe she truly wanted to repair the damage between us. But the other part of me couldn't forget everything she had put me through. The accusations, the harassment, the nights spent scared and angry in equal measure. It was all still fresh. I didn't know if I could trust her, or if I even wanted to. I brought it up in therapy during one of my sessions. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "If she's being sincere, ignoring her might ruin any chance we have of fixing things. But if she's lying, letting her back in could be a disaster." My therapist leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "What do you want, Amanda? Not what you think Sarah wants, or what you think you're supposed to do. What feels right for you?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with implications. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I want closure, but I don't know if I can trust her. Or if I even want to try." "It's okay not to have all the answers right now," she said gently. "Take your time. You're allowed to protect your peace, even if that means not responding." Weeks turned into months, and the letter remained where I'd left it, gathering dust on the counter. Every so often, I'd pick it up and read it again, searching for clues in Sarah's words. Was she manipulating me, or had she genuinely changed? In the end, I couldn't bring myself to make a decision. Reaching out felt too risky, but ignoring her entirely felt like leaving a door permanently closed, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for that either. The letter became a symbol of everything unresolved between us, a reminder of the bond we'd once had and the rift that now seemed impossible to bridge. For now, I let it sit, its presence a quiet testament to the uncertainty I still carried. Whatever decision I made, I knew it would shape the next chapter of my life. But for the moment, I wasn't ready to take that step. As I write this, the letter still sits on my counter, a constant, silent presence in my life. It's strange how something so small, just paper and ink, can carry so much weight. I've picked it up dozens of times, turning it over in my hands, but I haven't decided what to do. On the one hand, my life has been undeniably better since I cut ties with Sarah and the rest of my family. The peace I've found, free from their judgments, expectations, and endless drama, feels like something I've been searching for my entire life. But peace, I've learned, can be a lonely thing. The emptiness of being estranged from them still lingers. Holidays are the hardest. Thanksgiving used to mean sitting around a table, even if it was tense and filled with unspoken resentment. Now, it's just me, a frozen dinner, and a movie. The quiet is both a relief and a reminder of what I've lost. Therapy has taught me a lot about boundaries and self-respect. I've learned to stop internalizing the blame for other people's behavior and to recognize when relationships, no matter how deeply rooted, are doing more harm than good. But I still have moments of doubt. What if Sarah's letter is genuine? What if she really is trying to change? What if cutting ties wasn't the right answer? Those what-ifs keep me up at night. Sometimes I imagine picking up the phone, dialing her number, and testing the waters. Other times, I imagine responding to her letter with my own, a cautious olive branch extended from a safe distance. But then I think about the past, about everything that led me to this point, and I freeze. The fear of reopening old wounds is paralyzing. I don't know if I'm ready to take that risk, or if I'll ever be. For now, I'm choosing to focus on myself. My work, my friends, the quiet life I've built in this new city. It's not perfect, but it's mine. I take things one day at a time, trying to heal the parts of me that still ache from years of feeling unseen and unworthy. I've stopped chasing closure, at least in the way I used to think of it. Maybe I'll never get a clean resolution with Sarah or my family. Maybe the letter will sit on my counter forever, unanswered, a symbol of the uncertainty I've come to accept. The future feels like a blank slate, both terrifying and exhilarating. I don't know what's next. Maybe I'll reach out to Sarah someday, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll build a new family of friends and loved ones who see me for who I am. Whatever happens, I know one thing for sure. I'll face it on my own terms. For the first time in my life, that feels like enough.